Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have exactly 12 o'clock noon Eastern right now. We're going to give folks just one more minute as they work through logistics of logging into the webinar. So we'll get started here in just about another 60 seconds or so. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Omar Nashashibi with the Franklin Partnership, a one voice lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. I'm joined today by John Guzik, also of the Franklin Partnership, and Paul Nathanson and Caitlin Sickles of the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, a one voice strategic communications firm also here in Washington, D.C. Today's go-to webinar session is being recorded for archiving, so all participants are in listen-only mode. However, you do have the ability and are encouraged to communicate at any time by submitting questions using the question box on the right-hand control panel. We'll also try to answer as many questions as possible as they are asked and try to incorporate it into our presentation, so feel free to type away, and any others we do not get to we'll address at the end of the presentation. Again, we'll be sharing this, we'll be emailed out afterwards to all registrants, so even if you did miss something, we're happy to answer the questions even afterwards, following the point where you can share this more widely. Go ahead and get started with a quick overview, John, about the Franklin Partnership.
Thanks, Omar. This is John Guzik, also with the Franklin Partnership. One Voice, PMA and NTMA's bipartisan government relations public policy firm in Washington. We have had the honor of representing PMA and NTMA since 2003, and we have combined 120 years of experience advocating not only before Congress, but also the administration. And we work closely with the Policy Resolution Group.
100 years.
120. We're so much younger than
We're so much younger at PRG. This is Caitlin Sickles, and I work here at PRG, the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. Paul Nathanson and I do the strategic communications work for PMA and NTMA, and in that capacity, we promote PMA and NTMA in print, media, and of course on social media as well. And our work works to support the work of the Franklin Partnership because we create the communication strategy that amplifies the messages that we take to Capitol Hill. And then in the same way, we take the messages that we give to the Hill and to policymakers, and then we translate that into stuff the media can use and that the public can learn about.
What we're going to talk about today is we're going to start with some of the support services that we provide association members. We do much more than lobbying, and Omar is going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk, we're not going to rehash the election, but we're going to talk about what is the meaning of the election. What is the meaning, the recent election that we had where the Democrats took control of the House of Representatives and the Senate has been maintained control by the Republicans. What is the true meaning of that to manufacturing the legislative agenda moving forward? So we'll have a little bit of political discussion. Then we're going to talk significant amount of time on the administration's trade policies, the trade goals, et cetera. We're going to talk about the NAFTA, the U.S. Mexican-Canadian free trade agreement that is pending right now. And then we're going to talk a lot about tariffs, whether it's the steel and aluminum tariffs, the potential tariffs on autos and auto parts, the 301 tariffs on China. And then we're going to open it up for questions for each of you.
As John mentioned, there's a lot more that we do than just lobbying and strategic communications, especially these days with a lot of the trade issues going on right now. John and I especially are fielding constant questions from both NTMA and TMA members about how the current tariffs are affecting them. How do I find out my harmonized tariff schedule? What is the tariff rate potentially on top of the duty rate I'm paying? So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help with any questions you may have, whether it's help with a visa application, or is a local workforce training center near me, or again, questions that you may have when it comes to trade. And we're happy to answer those. And again, this webinar is being recorded, so even if we are speaking a little bit quickly or moving too fast through a topic, you're happy to review it later on if you happen to miss anything. But we do want to start quickly with the current state of Washington. And as you can tell just from the meeting, it was 17 minutes in the Oval Office yesterday with the president, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer, and it was quite the 17 minutes. So even maybe this slide could be a little of an understatement of some things to come as we're approaching a government shutdown in a couple of weeks. But this generally gives you a sense of where things are right now. And for Paul and Caitlin, but you can see that people are often right now talking past each other, not necessarily to each other, as they're trying to solve some of the nation's policy issues.
That's right. So Omar just demonstrated and showed a graphic about how the two different sides in Washington view each other. And one way that we can measure that is how it manifests, and that shows up in how the two sides talk. And one place that the two sides talk, although of course folks in Washington talk a lot, but one of the places where the two sides talk is on social media. And you can see that nearly all members of Congress are on Facebook and on Twitter, and they've also diversified onto YouTube, onto Instagram, where you see a lot of members of Congress, and a lesser amount, but still a big number on Snapchat as well. But that's really where the similarity ends. And to see what I'm talking about, look at this next slide where you see a chart demonstrating what the two sides are talking about. So these are the most popular hashtags used by members of Congress in each party during the year 2018. And you can see really strong message consistency on the Republican side talking about taxes. Taxes, 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 always in the top three for the entire year. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, you see them swinging at every pitch, going about everything from immigration to net neutrality to gun control, Kavanaugh, and then finally, in the month of October, getting to the issue that was purportedly the key issue for the election, which is health care. So what we see in this is not only difference in message consistency, message discipline, and key issues, but also what we really see is the brinksmanship that Omar's talking about. One thing we definitely don't see is any overlap between the two sides talking about the same issue, unless, of course, they're talking about it in a diametrically opposed way.
And we've seen that even with the results. Just here, a quick side by side, and don't kind of give you the what happened as we start to close out the political side. But the side by side right here, we just took a quick highlights of where some of those major changes that took place because of Democrats retaking control that the speaker, future speaker, and the minority leader reminded the president of yesterday. And you could see it was pretty widespread that they ended up getting to those 40 seats. And in North Carolina, that 40 may even increase to a gain of 41 once things get settled over there as well. But John, take a look at how the House was won. This started off maybe not a wave, but 40 starts getting close to that wave term that people had used.
Yeah, it certainly does. And when you look at that map on the right with the circles, it is a continuation of the trend that we saw in their last presidential election, where the Democrats do very well on the coasts. Democrats picked up 7 seats in California. They did very well in New York and in New England and in New Jersey. Omar mentioned North Carolina, which has been a solidly Republican area, but again, it's on the coast. Where the distinction is, and to Omar's point, is Democrats picked up seats in the Midwest, which President Trump should look as a concern, because that was his base. That was how he got to the White House, was by securing the vote of the Midwest in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin. Republicans lost 3 seats in Pennsylvania, in Minnesota. They lost seats in Iowa. They lost a seat in Kansas, which is, and so it is a troubling trend as Republicans look at this map. However, it's not as bad as it could be. When you look at the first midterm election of President Clinton, first midterm election of President Obama, Clinton lost 54 seats, Obama lost 65. So if Republicans lose 40, the debate right now in Washington, as Omar pointed out, is there a wave going on? The analysis is still being done, but it will have an impact on what legislation moves and does not move moving forward. But the bottom line is, demographically, Republicans will never be a governing majority if they have a gender gap of 19 points with women.
Yeah, that so clear. If you just want to look at one thing on this entire slide, just jump down just below the middle. The number of GOP freshman women, this means the number of women coming into the House for the first time as freshmen, 2. That's not good. They targeted over 40, and they ended up winning 2. And so whether it's the Democrats or Republicans, it's not a winning strategy when women are making up almost 52% of the electorate, and you're bringing in 2 new faces in a Congress that has about 100 or so, about 100 or so total new bodies. So when we talk about the impact of the new Congress based on the elections we just had, the demographics, the makeup, they're new incoming freshmen, they're younger than the previous one. They've got more veteran experience to help insulate them for the 2020 re-election. And the Democrats took pretty much most of the congressional districts that Donald Trump had won, I think around the Chicago area. And so this is certainly going to have a dynamic change in overall the way the U.S. House operates. But the Senate, probably closer to as predicted, where the GOP did just simply expand their seats by 2 there, their control. And does that ultimately change a whole lot? Probably not, John. It seems McConnell is just really continuing to focus on judiciary and moving judges through.
Yeah, and that is what Majority Leader McConnell believes is his legacy to this administration, is stay in session as long as possible. They talked about just today, last night, McConnell indicated to his members in the Senate that they may be working between the holidays just to move as many Senate nominations through, because, as you know, these federal judges are lifetime appointments. And so it was a unconclusive election because Democrats winning so big in the House, but not so much in the Senate. Republicans picked up 4 seats in the Senate, but they lost 2. But the 2 states that they lost, Nevada and Arizona, again, are troubling signs for administration looking at re-election in those 2 particular states.
I think one thing that I remember Caitlin saying back in March is their goal for forming our future in that MSG meeting is that this really is a year of the manufacturer in terms of the election. And here's a first example right there, Caitlin, in terms of how folks were focusing on it and the incoming class is safe to better understand the issues that you all deal with.
That's right. I mean, the election was certainly a story about the role of young people, the role of women, but it was also a story about the role of manufacturers. So there were a lot of candidates who ran, particularly freshman candidates running for the first time, who had manufacturing backgrounds. One particular story that's interesting was that the 2 folks who were running to replace Paul Ryan in his seat in Wisconsin argued in the public leading up to the election to what does it mean to work in manufacturing. Both of them had manufacturing backgrounds, one on the shop floor side, one on the legal side, and it was interesting to see what does it mean to be a manufacturer when everybody wants to be a manufacturer. So in the end, how it shook out is at least 16% of freshman members have some manufacturing industry expertise. That number is probably significantly higher because we have to factor in family expertise or things beyond personal career, but at least 16% have that industry expertise, which means they know your issues.
And
very important.
That advertising and the boasting about being a manufacturer is a far cry from, some of you may recall, 10 or 15 years ago when we used to count the number of times that manufacturing was mentioned in State of the Union addresses, which was not very many by either Democrat or Republican president.
Democrats did an excellent job of recruiting. You not only have a large number of people who have experience in manufacturing, you don't have the lawyers, you have people who have national defense experience. There's a number of veterans, Democrats elected, former CIA personnel. So the new freshman class of Democrats are not the traditional tree-hugging liberal attorney. They do have a much more vast experience. And secondly, Democrats did an excellent job of fundraising, much better than Republicans, and it really had an impact.
Looking forward, John, and quickly keep going. Remember 1998. Well, these incoming freshman Democrats, yes, they are different, but are they going to be able to resist the calls for impeachment that pretty much sunk a lot of Republicans in 98 when they pressed too far on Clinton?
Yeah, and that is going to be the challenge that the Democrats have. They are going to be pulled to the left like Paul Ryan and the Republican majority in the last Congress were pulled to the right by the Freedom Caucus. The progressives in the House of Representatives, and that progressive class has grown, is going to pull Nancy Pelosi farther to the left, and that's where we are hearing the calls from impeachment. And so I know a lot of the more moderate Democrats who are in that conference are urging caution and urging not moving forward so quickly on impeachment because there's so many other things that need to be done. As Omar said, it's a more partisan conference right now. When you look at many of the Republicans that lost, they were the more moderate Republicans. And so what impact does that have on legislation? It probably means more divided government. And I think that's what the American people voted. That's how they cast their vote, for divided government. We're going to see.
And let's not forget that this is Pelosi's second time around. I think both John and I are to the point where we believe she will be the next Speaker of the House. It looks like, especially after yesterday, the 17 minutes to the Oval, she does have the votes to probably hang on and get her 218 to win coming up in a couple of weeks as the new Congress begins. And she knows what she's doing. And she's very, very powerful speaker. The last time around, some would say the most powerful speaker of at least the last 50 or 60 years, if not longer than that. And she does have a strong ability to keep some of her people in line. And so I wouldn't underestimate, but there's definitely, to John's point, going to be a lot of folks really focused on this, especially the donor class. That's going to be the biggest problem. In addition to, you literally have at least 1 dozen sitting members of Congress who want to run for president against Donald Trump right now. And that's going to further complicate things. So let's take infrastructure, for example. There's going to be a lot of calls for move on infrastructure, a bipartisan issue, and move forward. So the House can actually probably pass an infrastructure bill. But why would those kind of Democrats running for president want to hand Donald Trump a major victory as the president they can go out and campaign on in 2020? We don't see that happening. We don't hear from staff they think that's going to happen. So you could see maybe something scaled down from that standpoint. But the big fight that we see probably out in the spring could be on NAFTA, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But you still have a debt ceiling increase coming up. There are going to be some complications, especially when it comes to federal funding for the government moving forward. But again, going back to what that incoming freshman class wants done, what does the donor class want done? Caitlin pretty much lays it out pretty well of some of the challenges that Pelosi is going to be dealing with.
That's right. John said that we have a more partisan conference now after the election, and that certainly appears to be true. Here's what our incoming freshman members are talking about, and this shows the most popular hashtags used on each side during the campaign. So what do we see here? Well, really strong alignment among Republicans around their key rallying cries, their team messages. On the other side, we're seeing the Democrats coalescing around far left issues. Now we have 7 or 8 issues on this list. So you again see that diversity in messaging, which is very difficult for leadership, but they're all on these far left issues from immigration, climate change, Medicare for all, that kind of thing. So this brinksmanship, it definitely looks like it will continue.
It does. And so from that, it tells us, okay, how to now really diving a little bit deeper into some of the one-voice issues on which we've been lobbying, what leverage do the Democrats have in the House now to potentially disrupt some of the progress that we've been making? Even just in the last 24 hours, we've had announcements that the EPA is moving forward with an update to the Waters of the U.S. Act, which the rule rather, where the EPA starts to expand its control over inland waterways from 3.3 million nautical miles to over 8 million. And so that really is a huge victory for us that could potentially be rolled back. Similar, they also put out a potential new rule this week dealing with emissions control systems coming from power plants that the Obama administration had put into effect. So again, we've been making some pretty good progress on a number of our areas, whether it deals with the Clean Air Plan or more importantly, even association health plans now being in place for the first time. But a lot of these areas where they are most vulnerable are going to be through the appropriations process, meaning that's how the federal government is funded. So if the Democrats don't want the EPA, for example, to take action to rewrite an Obama-era rule, they can put language in the federal funding bill that restricts the government from taking action to implement that new regulation. And so you definitely could see through the first thing how there could be some pullbacks on some of the success stories that we've had. However, we are hoping that ultimately the administration and the Senate folks and some of the moderate Democrats will be able to hold firm on some of the areas that are a bit more open to the business community. I mean, it's not all negative. You could certainly see maybe a little bit of opening. If anyone could make any progress on immigration, it is President Trump. It's kind of like Nixon in China, although this is still very much a campaign issue. And John, I think you and I both agree you're going to see some noise, especially out of the gate in the first month or so or two on immigration from Democrats, but probably not a whole lot of progress until we figure out this whole situation.
As I listened to the 17 minutes yesterday, all I was thinking about, the president's got himself into a box, but the Democrats really need to and their conference really wants them, and their donor class really wants them to deal with the dreamers and the immigration issue, and the Republicans will not want to go for it. But the deal is that there's some sort of comprehensive immigration that deals with the dreamers, the young kids who are in this country, and then get Trump his funding for the wall. Is there enough bipartisan support to get a deal like that done? It's a little uncertain at this point. I know the Republicans would want to choke on, passing something to, give citizenship to these people who came here illegally, even though they were children. And Democrats would choke over the concept of giving funding for border security or specifically a wall. So it's uncertain at this point.
But we do still expect, regardless, a pretty active register of items coming up from the federal government when it comes to regulations. In addition to the items you see there, we are expecting in the next couple of weeks a lockout, tagout, rewrite. They're looking at hydraulic presses for the first time in 40 years, a new rule on that area. You can see the overtime threshold increase is potentially coming in March of this coming year, from what we understand. The beryllium rule just took effect today. Today's the 12th. So that just took effect as enforcement effective today on general industry. So there still continue to be a number of developments on the regulatory side we'd advise folks to be aware of, regardless of whether they're on the Democrats' radar screen. But we need to sit through all that, because I think the thing that everyone really wants to talk about is on trade. Where are we right now? Where does it end? How is this really a winning campaign issue for the president? Again, at the top of most of our members' minds right now are, what happens to my inputs that I'm bringing? How about my machines? How can I seek protection? China's been stealing against us for years and decades. Now, what are some of my remedies? But even going back to that question, is this a politically winning issue? In many cases, the presidents think yes.
That's right. So, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
So we tested it out in the 2018 elections to see how it plays in campaigns, and mostly it was an issue in the nation's farm belt, in manufacturing hubs, in areas that are really feeling the fallout from tariffs. Here are three examples. So you have in Tennessee, Democrat Phil Bredesen, who was running against Marsha Blackburn. In Iowa, Democrat Abby Finkenauer, who was running against incumbent Rod Bloom. And in North Dakota, Democrat Heidi Heitkamp, who was running against Kevin Cramer. And in each of these cases, you had an opponent who had supported Trump's trade policies, sometimes kind of tepidly, like Marsha Blackburn, sometimes really aggressively, like in Iowa, where Rod Bloom had applauded Trump's political courage. And in each case here, we have a candidate who ran a really aggressive anti-tariff message in a campaign ad. And you can see from the indicators here how it played out. In one case, you have a victory. In two other cases, you have a loss. Now, there's a lot of factors in elections, and it could mean any number of things that these folks won or lost. But one thing that we can know from these results is that the relevance of this issue really varies state to state. How voters perceive this issue to be significant in their lives really varies. But so do opinions on this issue. And I think this demonstrates that there's a great diversity of opinions and on the strength of opinions. And the country's really split, even in places where this is meaningful and significant to voters. So that is a political background before you guys get into the real nitty-gritty of how this is impacting people.
So, John, I mean, you raised this point earlier when it came to the border, but now taking that argument to steel and trade, the president does view this as a winning issue. And in many areas, to Caitlin's point, trade is a winning issue. But take a look, John, he's got a number of things that he's taken on all at once instead of focusing on a singular issue.
Yeah, this is a cartoon here, but it is demonstrating that he's taking shots from all sides. It is because he's been so aggressive in his trade stance, whether it's the steel aluminum tariffs, China 301, the potential tariffs on autos and auto parts, but also the retaliation and the impact on the farm community that Caitlin just talked about. In the end, the administration, we believe, the administration's goal is to threaten tariffs, put on tariffs to achieve other long-term trade agreements. And we've seen this. The threat of putting on tariffs on China has led to discussions. The threat of putting on tariffs on the Japanese has led to discussions with the Japanese. And so the tariffs are a means to an end, and that's why he's being shot at so often.
Yeah, and so now we have to invert that conversation in terms of how does this policy coming from Washington affect that manufacturer in the middle? And some of you have seen this before, but we put together this chart to help some of our One Voice members really identify some of the risk and exposure and potential opportunity under the tariff. So, for example, if you do have any imported steel or aluminum subject to 10 or 25%, we suggest write those down, put in the dollar amount that you're exposed to there. Similar to the China tariffs, as you may be aware, and we'll get into more detail shortly, that there are a number of tariffs that are currently in place, 10% on about over 5,000 goods, and over 1,000 have 25% rates that are scheduled to change. What's your exposure there on any machines or any other items that you may be importing from China? John brought up retaliation against U.S. goods being exported. A few of you that are on this webinar right now, we know are in that situation. And then similar, the president ultimately is looking at potentially automotive. So this is just a tool. We'll email this presentation out. Feel free to print this slide off and take a look at your exposure, because again, from the president's standpoint, and John brought up the goals, we don't see many of these ending right away. Trade negotiations do take time. Trade deals do not happen overnight, especially when you're dealing with foreign governments that may or may not be democracies. But to John's point, what is the goal? Where are we heading? We do believe that tariffs are a means to an end, and whether that end game for the administration is additional free trade agreements, such as the UK, EU, and others, or is it to restrict imports into the United States? It can be a little bit of both. We do believe, though, that the goal of these tariffs are to turn these into quotas. And by quotas, we mean the government will allow a set finite number of specific products into the country by quarter, after which point, once you hit that limit, they will no longer let any more of that item into the country. We'll see perfect examples of that in steel from Korea in a few slides, where they literally have filled the quotas pretty early on in the year, and our manufacturers can't get the specialty metal they need. But in the middle of the screen, you'll see some example of other items that we understand from our sources in Washington that the administration is looking at putting on additional quotas and import restrictions on. The critical minerals, the bauxite item, alumina, things that go into making primary aluminum, and then secondary beryllium we've mentioned, cobalt, which is needed in everything from batteries to many of the steel that you all use as well. You can see that this could be very significant and potentially disruptive on the supply chain. So we are, again, advising manufacturers to get a better understanding of what does their current supply chain look like, especially going into 2019 without an end in sight. You potentially need to look at some other changes that are out there. But John, you mentioned the NAFTA ones out there that we're all thinking about.
I want to reiterate what Omar said, because that is a significant change in trade policy over generations. In the past, the goal of previous administrations in a bipartisan way has been to improve our economy, was to expand exports. That has been the general trade policy of Republican and Democrat administrations. This administration's goal is, one, to eliminate the trade deficit, but also to limit imports into this country. And the way we will expand our economy is by producing more internally. That is a significant change. And the way they get there, as Omar pointed out, is quotas. And we, as Omar pointed out, quotas could be even a worse situation than tariffs.
It really is. So that's why we really do suggest folks look at this, because they're very serious about this. Bob Lighthizer, who's the U.S. Trade Representative, knows what he's doing, and the president certainly does as well. Just because others in the business community may not be fully on board, there definitely is enough support for them to move forward. And the president believes that the steel and aluminum tariffs are what got the new NAFTA done, the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement that they just signed on November 30th. And where do they go from here? Quick update on John. You want to mention timing, and then we can go a little bit into some of the details that have been out there for a bit. But John, they just signed on November 30th, so from here they've got a set time frame. But what do you think of the options with the new flow-through Democrats?
Yeah, so they just signed it. The legislative text is due in the House by the end of January. The International Trade Commission has to review the trade agreement. That is done by sometime in March, and so we don't expect the Congress to pass it until probably May of next year. But having said that, they are about 80 to 110 votes short in the House of Representatives. In a bipartisan way, they should vote short of passing NAFTA. Democrats want stronger labor and environmental standards placed into NAFTA. Republicans have tremendous concerns that the steel and aluminum tariffs, which are impacting Canada and Mexico, are still in place. And so that is why we're looking at 80 to 110 folks votes short of passing that. And it is Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative's view, is they can address those concerns by members of Congress as they put forward this legislative language. I'm not so much of an optimist, but we'll see.
Well, and that comes down to what's in it and what does the president want. And lastly, on tactically, before we get into the details of it, the president is threatening to withdraw. It was called invoking Section 2205, which is a 6-month notice to withdraw from NAFTA. And that would be an effort to force Congress to take it or leave it on the agreement that was already recently signed. Honestly, they are still kind of writing a couple of the sections from what we understand. They're not fully finished, even though it's signed. So if he can do that, does that really help them, or does it hurt the cause? Because if they do withdraw from NAFTA, then we revert to pre-NAFTA levels. There is still an agreement in place. Technically, the agreement with Canada and Mexico, the U.S. had prior, at least Canada, is suspended. It was never actually terminated. So there is a small gap between one taking place and entering into force, and that's how you know. But keep in mind the side letters that deal with the automotive restrictions, for example, and the automotive parts restrictions, those are what are called side letters, and those took effect upon being signed. So those don't have to wait for a vote in Congress. They're considered an update to any existing agreement that's out there. And so those quota levels are already taken into effect. And so when people ask us, how does the new NAFTA affect my company and our industry and our business, it did do a lot of the items that we asked for. It updated cross borders. It's going to simplify the paperwork, making it electronic. For those of you with Mexico operations, they're going to remove some of the forced localization of intellectual property in the IT services that's required down there. So it's definitely an updated streamline. But some people describe it as it's still a car, but a car in 1994 and today look a lot different because they're just updated. However, when it does come to the steel and aluminum, those quotas are still in there. They are requiring a 70% content requirement for steel and aluminum to originate in North America in order for that vehicle to receive tariff-free treatment throughout the two countries. The concern that we've got right now is they take that and expand it to ask for what is the steel and aluminum content of parts downstream, meaning they're going to ask you all. We were told the answer is no, that the reporting requirement of 70% threshold was going to be limited to the OEMs only. We got word late last week of something we've suspected for some time, that the government is starting to ask some questions about, well, we also want to look at steel parts coming in and maybe want to look at the contents there. Our other concern similarly is that the OEMs are going to use the suppliers to help increase this 70% threshold, but many of you are purchasing steel and aluminum from service centers, and therefore it's very difficult, similar to complex minerals, for you to actually trace that original source. So there are still a lot of fluid moving parts to this that are not completely set in stone, despite the new NAFTA being signed into place. If you are non-automotive, then you will be very happy with the new the new NAFTA. If you are automotive, you still may be happy, but it's going to get a lot more complicated and very quickly, especially when you get into some of the wage reporting requirements. They are going to likely ask the parts manufacturers, what are some of the wage reporting requirements for your R&D that's being used to make a part under 8708. So it's going to get more complicated, folks, before it gets any simpler in the new NAFTA.
In an attempt to attract Democrat support, they included a labor provision that Omar mentioned. 45% of the passenger car, 40% of a light truck needs to be assembled with workers making over $15, $16 an hour. There are quota provisions in this new free trade agreement, U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement. Right now, 2.6 million cars can be imported from Mexico. 2.6 million cars can be imported from Canada duty-free. Right now, I think the number is like around 1.8 million. So they're under that quota right now. But if this trade agreement lasts, 16, 22 years as anticipated, well, there'll be pressures on that number. There's also quotas on auto parts coming in. I think from Mexico, the quota is $108 billion of auto parts, and with Canada, it's roughly $32 billion. So moving forward in this new era trade agreement, there's still going to be these quotas that we've talked about.
Yeah, they really are, and I think you're going to start seeing, especially the driver coming from the Chinese side, with the talk that President Xi had with President Trump a few weeks ago on December 1st. And hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity. I think all of you remember last week the stock market pretty much took a dive on Tuesday afterwards when Kudlow came out and conflicted some things that Navarro said and back and forth. Yes, we are on a 90-day extension deadline before we move forward, and we can move forward and then have the new tariff rates take effect. So today we have currently on Chinese products, about a little over 1,000 of them are subject to 25% tariff rate. Another 5,745 products are currently at a 10% rate. Those are worth about $200 billion and scheduled to increase to 25% on March 1. They were supposed to go up on January 1st to 25%, but have been subsequently delayed since then, after the talks to buy some more time between the two sides to discuss. There's no definitive end game here, and that's sort of the concern that many people have is, well, what is a deliverable? What can the Chinese provide to the U.S. in concrete numbers to make the president feel more comfortable in removing the tariffs that are in place? He obviously wants a balanced trade deficit, which would take decades to refocus most likely. So where do we go from here? You saw just now the Chinese have agreed to relower the tariff from the 40% back down to 15% where it was. That did really affect a good number on the autos, but this is still doesn't look like it's going anywhere soon. The president believes this is a politically winning issue, and so long as he does, we expect him to continue pushing forward on it.
Yeah, this is Paul, and I would just, on a ray of hope, the Chinese did announce today their first purchase of soybean in a while. So it's not a lot, but at least it's an indicator that hopefully there will be some progress on these issues.
And when Xi and Trump got together, they basically put in place a 90-day ceasefire while these talks continue. Lighthizer believes that's a hard deadline, and that's why we fully anticipate those steel tariffs that Omar talked about, $200 billion, are going to go up to 25%. We do not believe the Chinese will look very kindly on that, and so there'll be probably some threats of retaliation at that point, and that is where the president has indicated if there's future retaliation, I'm just going to put a 10 or 25% tariff on the remaining $267 billion of product coming from China. So basically, everything coming from China will have a tariff of one sort or another. This is a death spiral in trade, and so we'll see where things head.
And so after we send this presentation out to everybody, and you can print some of this out to review with your coworkers, we do strongly suggest if you do have anything already on the water or considering purchasing from China, that you take a look. Is it already subject to tariffs? But to John's point, he does add the $267 billion. Everything coming from China is going to be subject to tariffs. So you don't have to look it up anymore. What is your exposure? How can this affect you? You have an alternative. Can you file an exclusion from the tariffs? The answer is kind of. On List 1 and List 2 that are currently at 25%, the U.S. Trade Representative Office did allow for an exclusion process on List 1, which closed October 9th, I believe it was. Coming up on December 18th, List 2 closes. So if you are on that middle $16 billion list and you do want to have your product excluded, I believe you do have till the end of this week to get it done, early next week rather, so reach out to us. We are more than happy to help see if that's an option for you. They do not have an exclusion process, meaning a way to not have the tariffs apply to your imported product for the large one of 5,745 goods. That is intentional. USTR has set it 10%. You can deal with it, and you can start looking for an alternative source. And when they say that, they really mean it. They have not approved any exclusion requests right now. Questions 3A and 3B are, can you find this product from a third-party source, or can you source it from the U.S.? If you say yes to either of those, they're not going to approve your exclusion request. This takes us back to the end game. When does this all stop? Again, there are a number of items that are out there. However, the stock market is clearly a tell for the president in terms of measurement of how the economy is doing, and the Chinese have got to that tell. For example, they believe, and we all do as well here in D.C., that when the stock market drops, the president will hesitate to apply more tariffs that look like it'll hurt the economy. Because at this point, the economy from the manufacturing side is humming and doing great, but Wall Street seems to be willing itself into an economic downturn just based on potential threats and uncertainty. When the economy is doing a little bit better, then the president feels emboldened more to go after the Chinese. And so that's kind of emerging as part of their strategy as they look at how to respond to the president as he moves forward. Paul, I mean, what is the strategy on steel and aluminum? We've talked about the different tariffs. This is the original one that's been out there and seems to still be in place for some time.
Yeah, as Omar had mentioned, really, I think the administration, I agree that the administration really wants to give it, in the end, our trading allies will have a choice. They can have tariffs placed on their steel and aluminum exports or quotas. That's been the holdup on the talks with Canada and Mexico. The president continues to talk up the steel tariffs and about the number of plants that are opening. So there is still a pretty consistent message from the administration, unlike where you could point to the 301 tariffs and the talks with China that could lead to some relief. There are negotiations going on with Canada and Mexico, and that's the most likely next step regarding the steel and aluminum tariffs. But the administration continues to push, as we reported, for quotas to replace the tariffs, and our trading allies resist. Now, if you take the administration at its word when they imposed the tariffs, and they said that one of the reasons for imposing the steel tariffs was to get the steel industry up to over 80% for utilization rate. They were down in the low 70s when the steel tariffs were imposed. The steel industry's, domestic steel industry's own association reports on I think it's on a weekly basis or biweekly basis on capacity utilization, and they have hovered above at or above 80%. So if the president wished to, he could declare victory and end the tariffs, given that they've achieved their goals according to the domestic steel industry's own trade association.
They're not done making money yet, though. And you could even tell that in the comments. There was a study released yesterday by the Primary Aluminum Association and the Economic Policy Institute. And in there they had one of the two primary aluminum manufacturers in the country saying, no, we need these tariffs. And the Canadians shot back, no, you only actually make 2 million metric tons, and we need 5 million metric tons in the U.S. You're clearly importing in from Canada, so no, you don't need these. So the data that's being put out by those that have been in favor of the steel and aluminum tariff has been pretty selective, and a lot of the folks in the marketplace started to see through that to an extent. But no, we also don't see a real big end in sight. As you can see, there's a nearly 50,000 requests to exclude a steel or aluminum product from the tariff. They have granted a sizable number, as you can see, but there's still quite a ways to go. We've been working directly with the Department of Commerce in trying to streamline this process, trying to help individual One Voice members as they try to seek some relief. Because again, just because your tariff rate is 25%, that's not even the spread on what your steel costs are. In some cases, you're more than double on your China versus the U.S., and you're about 450 or so more, or about 400 more on Western Europe are hot roll banned over the United States. The price is a big difference, but your lead times, what you all report to us, have really extended and become uncontrollable. That's just under the tariff. And before we get into some other items on this, going back to our conversation between quotas versus tariffs, lead times can hurt you, increased prices can hurt you, but not getting the material can kill you. And that's in the case of South Korea quotas. This is of December 4th, last Monday, a week ago or so. You can take a look that the quotas are already filled for some of these. In many cases, they're going to be filled on January 1 because they will not allow even a small portion of the material. But even they're getting 99% on plate, you're needing for your tool and die makers, hot rolled sheet for many of your stampers, you're already getting these filled. When your quota gets hit, again, they will not allow any more of that material into the United States. So some of you medical device manufacturers, tool and die folks that are purchasing specialty metals from Korea, especially, we strongly suggest find either a warehouse you can buy as much and store it in the first quarter, or start looking at alternative sources. And this is going to expand beyond just these countries. Again, we believe the broader strategy is to include quotas on other countries that do move forward with trade agreements, such as the EU, Japan, and others, just like we saw happen under the new NAFTA.
To reiterate what Omar said, exclusions are not the solution. One, it's a long, complicated process, but they only last 1 year. And essentially, the administration is saying, we're granting you an exclusion so you can have that year to readjust your supply chain. And so it is just a Band-Aid to the problem that they see moving forward, and that is why they're advocating for such quotas as this.
Yeah, and I had an hour and a half meeting last Friday over at Politico. I brought in a manufacturer from Massachusetts, a metal user, and their purchasing manager and their CEO was on the phone and talked about they have 56 exclusion requests. And she explained to them the process and the fact that the objections that were being filed by inform letter right at the deadline, so that they could not they could not rebut the objections. They've talked about the exclusion getting lost, that they submit them and then they never get posted. And it was an eye opener for these reporters. They're working on a story right now. But just hearing that firsthand, and I'm sure many folks on this phone know this better than I do, that the process that you have to go through, and the fact that this purchasing manager was checking the internet. She said she spent an average of 2 hours a day checking on her exclusion requests just to make sure that there was not an objection posted, and it's just incredibly burdensome, and it's not a solution, as John just said.
We were with a one voice manufacturer last Thursday that is going through the process as we speak, through the exclusion process, and they had, I think it was Nucor, object. And even though Nucor literally had emailed them with a no quote. So they're still objecting, even when they're not interested in manufacturing. So keep that in mind as you're looking at some of your options. And further, keep in mind, please, that Switzerland is not part of the European Union. So even if you do get a deal on the EU, then you're not going to get any relief from any specialty metals if you're buying from the Swiss on that side. So again, we don't see a real end in sight. There is a court case, and it falls and following this closely. It's, I think, coming up on the 19th, I think, is when the next hearings on and all the three-judge panels coming up next week. So we hope to see a little bit of progress. And if we don't, either way, we expect that potentially could get appealed directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. The question there being, does the president have the authority under the Trade Act of 1962 to move forward and basically say everything is national security, from automotive to steel to aluminum to the other items that we understand are on their way under that 232 part of the law. So it's, again, slim chance, but there is a court case moving forward. From the congressional standpoint, a lot of the union Democrats are in support of at least tariffs on non-Canadian metals coming into the state. So we don't expect a whole lot of movement on Capitol Hill. It really comes down to grassroots and voters that supported the president reaching out and saying these aren't exactly the right way to get at the real problem, which is China. And that's what we've been telling everybody. We've been working with Aluminum Association and other groups to say if China's the problem, let's be focused on China and not really hurt a lot of our manufacturers who are the ones that are actually paying these tariffs to begin with. With that, we're going to start getting ready to wrap up. Feel free again, if you have any questions that you put over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a box there. Feel free to type them in. We're happy to take the questions as we go. From the exclusion process, there's a question that came up when we talk about could there be exclusion for specialty steels, for example, specialty steel long products coming in. There's two areas. They did announce after a lot of pushback from us, you can now make a request to have an exclusion on a country that has a quota. That was not initially the case and caused a big problem with Korea. In early September, they did make that change. However, they are still not doing product-wide exclusion. So meaning if multiple of you, which on your call, I know many of you do, use the exact same materials, probably some from the same service center, each of you individually has to request your own exclusion request from the Department of Commerce. So, for example, if the service center does apply, then they're okay. They're the importer of record. Then technically you shouldn't have a tariff if they're approved. However, that company and your neighbor, both of you would have to separately file exclusion for the exact same product if you wanted it. And that still does not guarantee you an exclusion. We're working with the Fastener Group, and they literally had the exact same individual. She filled out a form for her company and for the service center. One got approved and the other did not, even though the exact same language in both filled out by the same person. So it can be very arbitrary, the process, and that's why we've been fighting it. But no, they are not doing product-wide exclusions. They are doing a case-by-case consideration. Our email address, you'll most already have, is at the end. Feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to try to weigh in and give you a little better understanding. Is this really worth your time and worth your effort to move forward? Some of you might want to talk about internally, do I want to announce to the world that I'm having problems with these tariffs, which everyone is, but some of the data you might have is confidential or business proprietary. You don't want a competitor to know the specialty metals. That's also a further complicating factor when you apply for an exclusion request, whether it's under the China program or under the steel and aluminum that's out there. And so we really are trying to get this message out in the media. We actually just got a point here raised, some questions about the NBC visiting one of our members. And Paul and Caitlin, you all are leading the coalition right now to make sure the folks are educated. This isn't against the president. This is just more about how tariffs affect manufacturing.
Yeah, so our coalition is, you can check out the website tariffsourtaxes.org, and we do receive media requests several times a week from national media outlets who are interested in the tariffs, and we've become the voice of really the small and medium-sized metal-using manufacturers who these tariffs are hurting the most. On the request for we're happy to send you the slide deck, Steve Patterson, but let me know also who you're meeting with over at that publication, because we're talking to them every day. For manufacturers on here who want to join the fight, we're always looking for volunteers to talk to the media just about your own situation and about what's happening. But also our coalition speaks for our sector so that those who don't want to talk to the media, we are still getting the message out there about how these tariffs are impacting your business. So the coalition will continue until we have some relief from these tariffs. Hopefully our goal is to terminate the tariffs as quickly as possible. Note that we are not anti-administration or anti-anything. We just think that the tariffs are the wrong policy to help manufacturing, and we're focused on getting their repeal as quickly as possible. We're also on Twitter at Tariffs or Taxes as well, if you want to follow us.
But Don, the question always comes up is, all right, how do you know what to lobby on? How do you know about the position to take? And I think a lot of what Paul just said is, how do you get that data? It's through that survey we've got out there right now, John.
Yes. We are often asked, how do we determine what issues we advocate for and against on behalf of PMA and NTMA members? And it is as a result of the survey that each of you have received. We send out thousands of these surveys. We need at least 100 back. we're at about 50. So many of you on this phone call have a survey, or somebody in your shop has that survey on their desk or in their inbox, and we need those surveys completed. So that gives us a direction of where things are. The survey results that we received so far, not that big of a surprise, but we want to make sure we've got a wide swath of the manufacturing community responding to making sure, reinforcing what we're doing. That is our pushback when people say, well, why don't you advocate for X, Y, or Z issue? And it's because we're advocating on issues that the general membership talk about. And we rank those issues, they're 1 to 10. And we probably only have time to work on the top 3 or 4 of those issues. Others we will work with our coalition partners to achieve a legislative or administrative goal. And so making sure that those issues that are important to you are ranked 1, 2, and 3 is extremely important to us moving forward.
For example, we know workforce is the number one top issue after healthcare, and so one of the big items that we're working on right now. Last Tuesday, the White House just released a 5-year plan on how to strengthen access to STEM programs and how to further ingrain those from the K through 12 and over. We know that's a huge priority for our members. We know we need to be there. We were at a 4-hour planning meeting yesterday with NIST and MIM folks and the MEP folks and all those people just trying to figure out the next steps. Your survey results on registered apprenticeship programs and non-registered, that leads into it. Similarly, we didn't talk much about taxes, but we added a question this year on capital gains tax. It looks like it's affecting about 24% of you that have already responded. That's a big red flag for John and I that have to look out for different ways that Democrats might try to pay for a negotiated infrastructure bill, for example, with the president, and maybe the president will be willing to allow for an increase in capital gains. But we now know, based on the survey results, John just mentioned how important they are, that we got to watch out on the capital gains and certain other deductibility issues that come back and that we learn from the survey. So please, we do strongly encourage you to keep doing that and keep filling these out to the extent that you can. With that, we're happy to hold the line open for a few more minutes and answer any other questions that may happen. And one that just came in terms of European pricing, Paul mentioned this perfectly. Most of us are strong supporters of what the president's been doing for the manufacturing agenda. But one of the direct results, as people are typing in questions right now, one of the direct results of the steel tariffs, for example, is that the Chinese didn't stop making steel. They just started sending it to Europe. So then the Europeans started getting flooded with steel, causing their prices to drop. But that again means that your competitors are now getting cheaper steel in Europe that is non-tariff or has a lower tariff rate, and you can't compete. So it's not just so much that you've got cheaper steel than others or more expensive. It's now looking at how does it affect the global supply chain when your customers now go to you and say, well, I can get the same thing from Western Europe for a few cents cheaper per part. So that's some of our real concern that's out there of the unintended consequences of that.
Yeah, and our coalition keeps track of price. We use hot roll band as a sample that we use, and we've been tracking prices since January. On January 8th, the difference in prices with Europe between the U.S. and Europe was $78. It reached a high in July, a difference of $372, and now it's still at $263. So yeah, the price differentials have greatly increased since the beginning of the year between the U.S., China, and the U.S. and Europe.
But even on plate usually has even the biggest brand. Right now, I'm looking at U.S. prices 1,118. Standard plate from China is 469. So that just gives you an example of what y'all are dealing with throughout in the global supply chain that you're facing. Again, this webinar was recorded, and we will be sending it out to everybody at conclusion, along with a link to be able to download the slides and be able to share it with any of your colleagues in your shops. Any questions that may arise afterwards, you have the contact information for all 4 of us there. We're happy to speak to a single or get us on a conference call with many people in your shop and answer any questions on any of the topics that were raised today. Again, please do fill out that survey. It was resent to you yesterday on December 11th, so somebody in all of your shops has that sitting in their inbox. This will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a good day.